The F8F Bearcat is often remembered as one of the fastest and most powerful piston-engine fighters ever built, yet its combat debut never came during World War II. Designed by Grumman as a successor to the legendary F6F Hellcat, the Bearcat was intended to be smaller, lighter, and deadlier. An aircraft optimized for climb rate, speed, and maneuverability. But what if this machine had entered service in 1944, right in the middle of the Pacific War? The implications are staggering. By that time, the U.S. Navy was locked in brutal carrier battles with Japan, relying heavily on the Hellcat and the F-4U Corsair. Both were excellent, but the Bearcat represented a leap forward. Faster than almost anything the Japanese had, able to outclimb even the feared Mitsubishi Zero, and capable of turning tight dogfights into short, decisive encounters. Had it been introduced 1 year earlier, the Bearcat could have reshaped aerial combat over the Pacific, reducing U.S. losses, shortening campaigns, and even altering Japan's defensive strategy. Its advanced design promised a warplane that could dominate the skies, but arriving late, it never fulfilled that destiny. This raises the question, was the Bearcat the war winner that came too late, or would its presence in 1944 have simply accelerated the inevitable Allied victory? When comparing the F8F Bearcat to the F6F Hellcat, the difference in capability becomes clear. The Hellcat was the workhorse of the Pacific, shooting down more Japanese planes than any other U.S. fighter. But by 1944, the Hellcat was beginning to show its limits against improved Japanese models like the Ki-84 Hellcat and N1K Shiden. The Bearcat, on the other hand, was built with pure performance in mind. Its Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine gave it astonishing speed, over 420 mph, while its lightweight frame gave it a climb rate unmatched by any Allied fighter of the era. In a hypothetical 1944 deployment, this meant U.S. carrier pilots would have had a decisive edge in interception missions, climbing to meet Japanese raids before they could threaten the fleet. The Bearcat's agility also meant fewer losses in dogfights, as it could out-turn Japanese fighters while also outrunning them if necessary. This combination of speed and survivability would have transformed not just individual battles, but entire strategies. Carrier groups could operate more aggressively, knowing they had an aerial shield far superior to anything Japan could muster. Thus, the Bearcat's earlier arrival might not just have been about faster dogfights. It could have rewritten the pace of the Pacific War itself. Beyond raw performance, one of the most intriguing what-ifs about the Bearcat's early arrival in 1944 is the psychological impact it could have had on Japanese aviators. By that stage of the war, many Japanese pilots were already demoralized by relentless U.S. industrial power and superior tactics. The Hellcat had already crushed the once-feared Zero, but Japan still hoped that new aircraft like the Ki-84 and Shiden could restore balance. Imagine their shock if, instead of meeting familiar Hellcats, they faced a brand new American fighter that could climb like a rocket, dive with unmatched speed, and still turn tighter than most of their best planes. The Bearcat would have symbolized to Japanese pilots that no matter how hard they tried, the Americans always had something better waiting in reserve. Morale would have plummeted faster, perhaps accelerating the trend toward desperate kamikaze tactics. The Bearcat, then, would not only have been a physical weapon, but also a psychological one, shattering Japanese confidence in the air, making their skilled pilots feel obsolete, and further ensuring that the war tilted irreversibly in America's favor. Another crucial factor in considering the Bearcat's potential 1944 debut lies in its design specifically for carrier operations. Unlike some aircraft adapted for naval use, the Bearcat was tailor-made for short-deck takeoffs, quick landings, and rugged durability. In 1944, the U.S. Navy was expanding its fast carrier task forces, striking deep into Japanese territory. Having an aircraft like the Bearcat, optimized for rapid deployment and recovery, would have given carriers even greater offensive flexibility. The smaller wingspan meant more fighters could be stored on deck, while the lighter design meant faster turnaround times for combat missions. This efficiency could have meant larger sortie numbers, overwhelming Japanese defenses even more effectively. Imagine Task Force 58 launching waves not of Hellcats, but of Bearcats, sleeker, faster, and more lethal. Japan's already stretched air defenses would have been obliterated under the weight of such assaults. The strategic effect would not just be battlefield dominance, but accelerated collapse of Japanese air power at its defensive perimeter. One of the greatest threats facing the U.S. Navy in late 1944 was the rise of kamikaze attacks. Fast, desperate, and often impossible to stop, these suicide missions inflicted heavy casualties despite U.S. air superiority. Here lies one of the most significant what-ifs about the Bearcat's arrival. With its blistering climb rate and top speed, the Bearcat was perfectly suited for interception missions. Unlike the slower Hellcat, the Bearcat could have scrambled quickly to meet incoming kamikazes, shooting them down before they reached the fleet. This capability could have drastically reduced damage to American carriers and warships during critical operations like the Battle of Leyte Gulf or Okinawa. Every ship saved from destruction meant stronger task forces, faster advances, and fewer casualties. In this sense, the Bearcat might not only have won dogfights, but also saved lives by neutralizing Japan's most desperate weapon. Its absence left the Navy to fight kamikazes with less agile aircraft, prolonging the threat longer than necessary. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was the terror of the Pacific early in the war, but by 1944 it had become outdated. Still, it remained a dangerous foe in the hands of skilled pilots. The F6F Hellcat had already proven its superiority over the Zero, but the Bearcat would have taken this dominance to an entirely new level. The Zero's strength had always been maneuverability, yet the Bearcat combined agility with blistering speed and power. In a head-to-head match, the Zero would have been helpless, unable to climb, unable to dive, and unable to outturn its opponent. Had the Bearcat arrived in 1944, the legend of the Zero might have ended even more brutally, remembered not as a once deadly machine, but as hopelessly obsolete in the face of American innovation. This shift could have accelerated Japan's crisis of confidence in its military technology, reinforcing the narrative that U.S. industry would always produce a better aircraft. For YouTube audiences, this clash of legends angle, Bearcat vs. Zero, would be the perfect viral hook, exploring how one fighter could have erased the myth of Japanese air superiority in a single year. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, famously known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, saw American Hellcats annihilate Japanese aircraft at staggering ratios. But what if those Hellcats had been Bearcats instead? The outcome would have been even more lopsided. The Bearcat's unmatched climb rate would have allowed American pilots to intercept Japanese bombers and escorts earlier, giving them more chances to thin the enemy formations before they even reached the fleet. The result could have been a battle where Japanese losses were not just crippling, but total. Fewer American casualties would have meant stronger carrier forces moving forward into the Philippines campaign. For history fans and aviation enthusiasts alike, imagining a Turkey Shoot 2.0 with the Bearcat at the center provides a thrilling alternative history scenario, one where the Japanese air arm might have been destroyed in a single decisive blow, shortening the war in dramatic fashion. One of the biggest questions surrounding the Bearcat's hypothetical early arrival is whether it could have shortened the Pacific War itself. By 1944, Japan's defeat was already inevitable, but the question was how long and bloody the final campaigns would be. The Bearcat, with its ability to dominate the skies, could have accelerated America's advance by protecting fleets more effectively, destroying enemy air defenses faster, and reducing the need for prolonged attritional battles. For example, the costly battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa might have seen lower U.S. casualties if Bearcats had provided superior air cover. Japanese kamikaze effectiveness might have been halved, and U.S. forces could have advanced on the home islands with greater strength. While it's unlikely the Bearcat alone would have forced Japan's surrender earlier, it could have reduced the suffering and shortened the timeline. In the end, history remembers the atomic bomb as the war's final blow, but with Bearcats in 1944, Perhaps Japan would have been broken months earlier, sparing lives on both sides. One of the reasons the Bearcat did not arrive in time for combat in World War II was America's focus on mass production of existing models like the Hellcat and Corsair. These fighters were already proven, reliable, and available in vast numbers. Introducing the Bearcat in 1944 would have required shifting resources and retraining pilots, potentially slowing production. But America's industrial might was so immense by this point that it's worth asking, could the U.S. King have built both Hellcats and Bearcats simultaneously? The answer is likely yes. By mid-1944, U.S. factories were producing warplanes at unprecedented rates. Adding the Bearcat into the mix might have been challenging, but not impossible. The real obstacle may have been bureaucratic conservatism. Why change what's already working? This reveals a fascinating truth about wartime innovation. Sometimes victory is delayed not by technology, but by caution and logistics. Had America gambled on introducing the Bearcat sooner, the payoff might have been staggering. Although the F8F Bearcat never saw action in World War II, it left an enduring legacy. It became one of the fastest piston fighters ever built, serving briefly in the U.S. Navy and later in the French Air Force during the First Indochina War. But its true story lies in the question we ask now: what if it had arrived earlier? For aviation enthusiasts, this legacy makes the Bearcat a symbol of untapped potential, a machine that could have rewritten history had it come just 1 year sooner. On YouTube, this narrative resonates because it blends history with imagination viewers love to explore. What if? Scenarios where a single technological shift changes the course of war. The Bearcat's sleek design, blistering performance, and tragic timing make it the perfect case study in how history is shaped not just by invention, but by timing. Its absence from World War II remains one of the great, what could have been, stories of aviation history. By 1944, the United States Navy already held a commanding advantage in the Pacific, but Japanese pilots were still capable of deadly strikes when given the opportunity. The introduction of the Bearcat in 1944 would have cemented American dominance in a way that no other aircraft could. With its incredible climb rate, Bearcat squadrons could have intercepted Japanese bombers long before they reached American ships. Unlike the slower Hellcat, which often met enemy planes closer to the fleet, the Bearcat could have operated as a true aerial shield. This would have redefined the concept of air superiority at sea, creating a protective umbrella so complete that Japan's air power might have collapsed even faster. For YouTube audiences, this scenario sparks the imagination. What if the U.S. Navy had been not just superior, but utterly untouchable in the skies by mid-1944? The Bearcat could have turned the Pacific into a one-sided battlefield months before the war's end. While the Zero was Japan's most famous fighter, by 1944 the Japanese Army and Navy were fielding newer, more dangerous aircraft like the Ki-84 Hellcat and the N-1 Ki-2J Shidenkai. These fighters were capable of matching or even exceeding the Hellcat and Corsair in certain areas, posing a real threat to U.S. pilots. The Bearcat, however, was designed to crush exactly this kind of competition. With its superior speed, power, to weight ratio, and advanced aerodynamics, it could have swept these newer Japanese fighters from the sky. Imagine the morale effect on American pilots who suddenly found themselves flying an aircraft that outclassed every enemy plane with ease. The sense of invulnerability would have boosted confidence, making combat missions less risky and more decisive. On the Japanese side, the realization that even their next generation designs could not compete would have shattered any lingering hope of regaining air superiority. This clash of advanced technologies is the kind of dramatic what-if scenario that captivates both aviation enthusiasts and casual viewers alike. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 was the largest naval battle in history, and air power played a decisive role. American Hellcats and dive bombers were instrumental in protecting carriers and striking Japanese surface ships. But what if Bearcats had been available during this massive confrontation? The Bearcat's speed and climb rate would have made it the ultimate interceptor, ensuring that Japanese aircraft could not break through to threaten the fleet. Additionally, Bearcats could have pursued retreating Japanese forces more aggressively, inflicting even heavier losses on an already crumbling navy. The psychological effect on Japanese naval commanders, seeing their few remaining carriers and battleships wiped out by swarms of faster, deadlier fighters, could have accelerated the collapse of Japan's fleet. Leyte Gulf was already decisive, but with Bearcats in the air, it might have gone down in history as the single battle that completely erased Japanese naval power in one blow, another overlooked. What if is how the Bearcat's handling qualities could have influenced pilot training. The Bearcat was known for its superb maneuverability and forgiving flight characteristics, making it easier for new pilots to master. In 1944, the U.S. Navy was rapidly training thousands of pilots to keep up with the massive expansion of carrier forces. If those pilots had been introduced to the Bearcat earlier, the learning curve might have been shortened. More pilots could have been combat-ready sooner, and their survival rates in actual battles would have been higher thanks to the Bearcat's superior performance. Imagine rookie aviators, barely out of flight school, climbing into a fighter that gave them instant confidence in dogfights. This could have dramatically increased pilot effectiveness, creating a larger pool of skilled flyers, just as the Navy was pushing into the Philippines and beyond. Training and technology together would have formed a lethal combination, one that could have overwhelmed Japan's dwindling pool of veteran pilots even faster. The F-4U Corsair was another American icon of the Pacific War, beloved for its ruggedness and firepower. But if the Bearcat had arrived in 1944, it raises the question, would the Corsair have been pushed aside? The answer is complex. The Corsair excelled not only as a fighter, but also as a ground attack platform, carrying bombs and rockets against Japanese positions. The Bearcat, by contrast, was optimized purely as a high-performance interceptor. If it had entered combat in 1944, the Navy might have shifted roles, Corsairs focusing on ground attack while Bearcats dominated the skies. Together, they would have formed a devastating 1-2 punch, Corsairs hammering Japanese troops and ships while Bearcats kept the skies clear of enemy aircraft. For history lovers, this imagined partnership is a thrilling vision, the legendary Corsair and the untouchable Bearcat flying side by side, reshaping the final battles of the Pacific War. The Battle of Okinawa in 1945 was one of the bloodiest campaigns of the Pacific War, and kamikaze attacks caused devastating losses to the U.S. fleet. But if Bearcats had been operational by mid-1944, they would have been available in large numbers by Okinawa. Their blistering speed and unmatched climb rate meant that kamikazes, often spotted late as they dived toward carriers, could have been intercepted more effectively. Every kamikaze destroyed before impact meant hundreds of sailors saved and carriers kept operational. Imagine the effect of Bearcat squadrons intercepting kamikazes high in the sky, shredding them before they got close. This capability could have dramatically reduced American casualties, preserved naval strength, and hastened the end of the Okinawa campaign. For viewers, this is one of the most powerful what-if images. The Bearcat not just as a warplane, but as a life-saving shield for thousands of American sailors under siege. Although designed for the Pacific, the Bearcat's early arrival could also raise the question of its impact in Europe. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was deploying advanced fighters like the P-51 and the Me-262 jet. While the Bearcat would not have been able to match the Me-262's sheer speed, it could have climbed and maneuvered the German piston-engine fighters with ease. If deployed in limited numbers to Europe, the Bearcat might have helped escort bombers against late-war German defenses, replacing the P-47 Thunderbolt or even rivaling the P-51 Mustang. The idea of Bearcats dogfighting over Berlin adds another layer of excitement for history fans, even if it never happened. Though it was a naval fighter, its performance was so advanced that it could have made an impression on both theaters of war. For YouTube storytelling, this cross-theater what-if adds viral appeal by blending Pacific and European battlefronts in a single narrative. The P-51 Mustang is often hailed as the greatest American fighter of World War II, largely because of its long range and escort role. But the Bearcat, while not designed for long-range escort, was superior in speed, climb, and agility. If it had been introduced in 1944, questions would inevitably arise about whether the Bearcat could have replaced or even surpassed the Mustang in fame. The answer depends on mission profile. The Mustang excelled in Europe because it could escort bombers deep into Germany, while the Bearcat was ideal for shorter-range, high-intensity carrier missions. Still, the performance gap was so significant that had the Bearcat been more widely known in 1944, the Mustang's reputation as the best might have been challenged. This, who was better, debate is exactly the type of viral content that thrives on YouTube, pitting two legendary fighters against each other in a battle of specifications and imagined duels. Even if the Bearcat had arrived in 1944 and dominated the skies, its reign would have been brief. By 1945, jet fighters like the Me-262 in Germany and later the P-80 Shooting Star in the United States were signaling a new era of aerial combat. The Bearcat might have become the ultimate piston fighter, only to be overshadowed within a year by jet technology. Still, had it proven itself in combat in 1944-45, its reputation would have been cemented as a legendary warplane, instead of being remembered as the fighter that arrived too late. It could have been remembered as the fighter that defined the final year of the war. On YouTube, this narrative makes for an epic twist, the Bearcat as both a symbol of peak piston, engine design, and a transitional figure, bridging the gap between propeller-driven legends in the dawning jet age. In the end, the story of the F8F Bearcat is one of timing. It had the speed, power, and agility to dominate the skies of 1944, but it arrived too late to prove itself in the crucible of World War II. Had it entered the fight even a year earlier, it might have shortened the war, saved thousands of lives, and reshaped the reputations of other iconic aircraft like the Hellcat, Corsair, and Mustang. Instead, it became a what-if machine, remembered as one of the greatest piston fighters never to fight in its intended war. For YouTube creators and viewers alike, this is why the Bearcat remains endlessly fascinating. It is not just an airplane. It is a story about opportunity missed, history's twists, and the tantalizing idea that one machine, arriving just a little sooner, might have rewritten the final chapter of World War II.